Thank you for visiting this limited series. The infection was initially mild, my small town city council run, the toxic American pandemic response, and what both mean for the future of the country, written by Heather Christina Schmidt. You can view the entire series now on schmidttalks.com or subscribe to get it sent in parts to your email box weekly.
So this is the thing about politics, the wound started out incredibly small. The infection was initially mild. The coronavirus pandemic, and everything that came with it, quickly put on display everything that is wrong with this country. Our politics are too local. Our response is too rooted in money. Personality has become too much a part of policy making. Messaging, not policy, or simply right or wrong, is a make or break tool, which is absurd when you really get down to it. What begins as something minor can explode into a big problem, a crisis, in a matter of just days. This is exactly what has happened. Politicians on every level showed themselves to be incapable of handling the crisis before them. On my city council, we had so many people that couldn't see past years of just saying what sounded best, and they failed to anticipate that this would result in a rapid erosion of trust in the community. When COVID first hit the United States, 2 of the residents of our city were on that first cruise that returned with the illness. The patients 0 and 1 for our community, were ill for a week or more before they were even tested. When we all finally found out that they had, in fact, come back with SARS-CoV-2, naturally the public had questions. I asked several of our city council members if we knew the locations the people had been. When I come home from a vacation, I'll do things like take an Uber, go grocery shopping. If we came down with a cold or flu, we'd go to the pharmacy. One city council member replied to me, well, we should hope that the community helped them get what they needed so they could isolate. Except they didn't even know they had COVID yet, and so the trust began to erode in those earliest days for many of us. Unfortunately, and on every level, it didn't take long before it was all lost. My city council race was nothing particularly unique. In fact, it was exactly what every other race in America is like. It is exactly what the future of America may end up being. People that run for water boards and school boards today get into the same type of toxic political wielding that the president does. We would be foolish to believe this is not intentional. In fact, I know it is, as do many within the upper echelons of the 2 major political parties. When I was interning at the end of my undergraduate degree, I went to the California Democratic Party's annual convention in Sacramento as the denouement of my internship. I still vividly remember meeting with my academic advisor afterwards, where I described to him the talk I attended by some group presenting what they called the Red Takeover. This was the Republican Party's plan to take over American politics by filling in every nonpartisan seat they could with party line favorites. It didn't even matter if the people were qualified or had experience in government or public policy. All that mattered was that they were allegiant to the party and its ideologies, at all costs. My advisor's face filled with horror as we talked about this, and, as idealistic as every other college student, I giggled and said, but that'll never happen. At the Retirement Communities Candidates event, the one where the moderator was an ardent supporter of my opponent, one question came up about what our political affiliations were. A nonpartisan seat in name only, it was still well known that he and I had both taken party endorsements, and yet he had claimed on his campaign signs to be independent, so someone was trying to draw out of him the truth. In his answer, he admitted his allegiance to the right-wing faction of the GOP, and then went on in a whisper of a voice, leaning into the microphone, about how the thing to remember about me, remember he was campaigning on not being me, rather than his own merits, was that the Democrats had an insidious plot to install puppets in nonpartisan seats all over the country. Projecting as many good Republicans do, he slithered this accusation into the microphone, while I realized that he was also probably right. Not that I was some blue puppet going to take over the council with the Democrats' agenda. But the plot he described was quite clearly real overall. It was over 15 years ago that I saw that presentation at the California Democratic Party's convention, and the truth was that I had left halfway through it. I didn't even stay to hear the part I should have stayed to hear, that the Democrats were planning to align their strategy with the Republicans, to fight fire with fire. They both planned to do it, and today it appears that they've been successful. This, surely, is how in my own city we could have a nurse sitting on the city council, in the middle of a pandemic, doing absolutely nothing for public health and nurses. When the nurses union approached me about an endorsement, it was mainly to air grievances about how they did not feel protected while working in our community when a second city council member, my opponent, sits or sat on the board of the local healthcare district. After the election, This clear preference to party politics and staying in office superseded what was right, with the pandemic, as well as a host of other measures that came before the city council that would impact the quality of life, health, and safety of our residents. With all of them, and not just in this city council. Once it became so evident to me that all of our nonpartisan seats were simply puppets installed with wads of cash and a familiar name, it was easy to identify just who landed on which side, and why so much had gone wrong. This isn't to say that there's anything particularly wrong with people choosing a side, so to speak, and then running for office. It's what I did. But they have to be allowed to deviate from the party on certain issues, and there still has to be some core aspect of them that is fundamentally qualified to lead independently. This, I feel, is like antibiotics to an infection that left otherwise alone would become deadly. Instead of this though, what has happened, is that party leaders have taken up the practice of handpicking who will run. They groom their candidates. This happens in big party leadership, where the party decides and elevates high-profile figures to run for big-ticket offices. And it happens, probably more prevalently and dangerously, in local political party-affiliated groups. People in my community have handpicked and installed, either by genuine and well-funded elections, or by appointment after someone retires midterm or dies, a handful of puppets to take seats they are otherwise not qualified for. This has only been made worse with the rise of influence of social media, and culture wars stoked by both parties meant to politicize otherwise non-politically divisive issues. Examples of this would be masks in schools and what textbooks are used to teach middle schoolers sex education or history. Critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, and the concept of systemic racism. False flag and rallying around a cause have always been used as political rhetorical devices, but thanks to class party politics and growing divisions, stoking the flames of these cultural divisions only stands to make it all the more easy for political parties to hijack these hot-button issues to win nonpartisan elections. Even though none of them truly believe in any of it. How this relates to a real crisis, be it the pandemic, or something more long-term like homelessness, is that then you have these bodies in place of leaders that are simply ill-equipped to handle what's been put before them. These people, these political drones that run on slogans and pep rallies, are so tuned into suiting only the interests of their donors and their ideologies, that this is how they approach a crisis that affects everyone. With the pandemic, we saw it on the local county and city level with small businesses. Small businesses make up such a large percentage of campaign contributors in my community that this became the default beneficiary of CARES funding when it was time to dole it out. In a public health crisis, public health was a mere afterthought. County supervisors were mostly concerned with when weddings would again be allowed, and how soon the malls could be back to full capacity. FEMA-funded programs, like meals for seniors and free hotels for COVID-positive isolations, quickly were shut down the first chance they could as well. Because while seniors were still hungry and people in multi-generational households still had a hard time isolating from vulnerable family members, the interests of restaurant and hotel owners came first. As things began to open up, community leaders branded those that still stayed home as selfish and hurting small business. This is how far afield we've gone in our thinking, that as community members, if we don't support their donors, as we support them, we are in the wrong. Moreover, it's become even more evident over the years that on some level, many of the people both in elected and appointed office don't even believe in the principles on which America was founded. The GOP so clearly does not believe in representative democracy, while the Democrats have stopped pandering to the idea that there is such a thing as a social contract. Now in office for over a year, some interviews of White House staff and advisors include comments from these people outright saying as such. And in local Democratic groups and more conservative organizations just the same? Talk to any of them and they don't even know what a social contract is.
Keep going to continue. The infection was initially mild, my small town city council run, the toxic American pandemic response, and what both mean for the future of the country, written by Heather Christina Schmidt, or come back next week for the next installation on schmidttalks.com. Thank you to our sponsors, and subscribers like you. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay aware.